Call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in October. And I need you to understand what made it different from every other call I'd taken in 19 years of tribal police work. The voice on the radio was mine, not similar to mine, not someone who sounded like me. It was my voice, my cadence, my habit of clipping the end of the word dispatch so it comes out dispatch when I'm winded. It was my badge number, 4417, spoken the way I say it. 4417, not 4417, the way the manual prescribes. The caller was requesting immediate backup on the mountain. He gave coordinates. He described a situation involving a missing family of 4 whose minivan had been found at a trailhead with the engine still warm. He used the name of my sergeant, Danny Kustachin, who was standing right next to me in the dispatch room when we heard it. Danny looked at me. I looked at him. The transmission was coming from the mountain. The timestamp on the recording was dated 3 years in the future. And the family of 4 the caller described had not yet been reported missing. They wouldn't be for another 11 months. I'm telling you this now because I retired 7 years ago. Because Danny retired 4 years ago. Because the dispatcher who logged that call, Brenda Whitehawk, died last spring. And I promised her I would never talk about this while she was alive. I kept that promise. My name doesn't matter. My badge number was 4417. I served the Makwa Lake First Nation Tribal Police for 22 years, the last 9 as a senior officer responsible for wilderness patrol, search and rescue coordination, and criminal investigations involving the backcountry sections of the reservation. Our territory covered roughly 1,100 square miles of boreal shield country in northwestern Ontario lakes. Muskeg, black spruce, granite ridges, and one mountain. Everyone who has ever worked public safety on or near this reservation knows the mountain. Its official name on provincial maps is Burnt Ridge. The Anishinaabe name is older, and I won't use it here because it was never meant to be written down. What everyone calls it, officers and civilians alike, is simply the mountain. There is no confusion. When someone says the mountain, you know which one. It rises about 2,200 feet above the surrounding terrain. In a region that is mostly flat or gently rolling, it is visible from almost everywhere on the reservation. Dense boreal forest covers the lower 2/3. Above the tree line, there are granite barrens, lichen fields, and a series of shallow depressions that hold water in the spring. There is one maintained fire road that reaches approximately halfway up the south face before it dead ends at a locked gate. Above the gate, there are older logging roads, now overgrown, and a network of game trails. At the summit, there is a decommissioned fire tower that the Ministry of Natural Resources officially removed from service in 1987, though I have personally seen its light operating twice, once in 2009 and once in 2014. Both times, the ministry confirmed no personnel were on site and no power source was connected to the structure. For the public, the mountain is simply a place with poor cell coverage, rough terrain, and a history of people getting turned around. Signs at the trailhead warn of limited emergency services. The fire road gate is locked with a standard MNR padlock. Nothing about it looks unusual. For anyone in uniform, the picture is different. I will tell you what every veteran tribal police officer, every experienced conservation officer, every senior paramedic, and every fire chief in this region knows, and what none of them will confirm on any record. If an emergency call comes from that mountain after dark, nobody responds alone. That is not in any manual. It is not in any policy. It is not written down anywhere. It is taught the way you learn which dispatcher you can trust with an honest report and which one will flag you to administration through proximity, repetition, and the slow accumulation of things you cannot explain but can no longer ignore. I ignored it once. What I found is why I'm talking to you now. I need to explain how tribal police work functions in a community like ours before any of this will make sense. We are not a large force. At full strength, we had 11 sworn officers covering 1,100 square miles, with mutual aid agreements with the Ontario Provincial Police, the local OPP detachment in Kenora, and the Ministry of Natural Resources conservation officers. In practice, mutual aid means that if you need backup on a Friday night, the nearest OPP cruiser is 90 minutes away, and the conservation officer is probably asleep in a town 2 hours east. You learn to handle things yourself, or you wait until morning. Our calls are mostly what you'd expect: domestics, property disputes, alcohol-related incidents, traffic accidents, mental health checks, missing persons, and wildlife encounters. The reservation has roughly 4,000 residents spread across the main settlement and a dozen smaller communities connected by gravel roads, some of which become impassable in spring breakup or heavy snow. Our jurisdiction is technically limited to the reservation boundary, but in practice, we respond to anything within reasonable range because nobody else will. The mountain sits almost entirely within reservation land, with a small portion of the northeastern slope falling under provincial crown land. This jurisdictional split matters because it has historically created a gray zone in which neither our force nor the OPP nor the MNR has clear ownership of incidents. Calls from the mountain often passed through 2 or 3 agencies before anyone physically responded. Paperwork was duplicated, misfiled, or quietly dropped. I did not understand for years that this was not incompetence. It was architecture. The confusion was load-bearing. I joined the force at 23, a local kid who'd gone to the police college in Aylmer, and come back because I didn't want to work in Toronto, and because my grandmother was still alive, and I wanted to be near her. My first 5 years were standard patrol shifts, traffic enforcement, community policing, the usual slow education in how a small force operates. I heard references to the mountain from the beginning, nothing dramatic, no campfire stories, just the texture of how experienced officers talked around certain subjects. Don't go up past the gate alone. If dispatch sends you up there at night, call Danny first. If your radio starts doing the thing where it repeats, turn it off and come back down. I asked early on what the thing was. The officer I was riding with, a 15-year veteran named Paul Meekus, looked at me for a long time and said, "You'll know when you hear it." He was not being dramatic. He was being precise. My first direct experience with the mountain came in my 6th year on the force, in late September. A pair of hikers from Thunder Bay had driven up to walk the Ridge Trail. They'd signed in at the trailhead register at 9:15 a.m. By 7 p.m., they hadn't signed out or returned to their vehicle, a silver Toyota Tacoma parked at the fire road gate. A passing conservation officer noted the vehicle and called it in. Standard procedure, we'd give it until dark, then reassess. At 9:40 p.m., dispatch received a cell phone call from one of the hikers. The connection was poor but audible. The caller, a man named Trevor Bryce, said they were lost. That they'd been following the trail markers, but the trail had moved. And that his GPS unit was showing coordinates that placed them roughly 2 kilometers inside Woodland Caribou Provincial Park, which is physically impossible from where they'd started. He sounded calm but confused. His hiking partner, a woman named Dana Sue, could be heard in the background asking him to describe the lake they were looking at, because she didn't remember a lake on the route they'd walked. I responded with Paul Meekus. We drove the fire road to the gate, geared up, and started up the main trail on foot with headlamps and a handheld GPS. The night was clear, about 4 degrees Celsius, no wind. Standard bush at night, dark timber, the smell of cold spruce, nothing unusual. We found them at 11:15 p.m., sitting on a granite outcrop about 40 minutes above the gate. They were coherent, uninjured, mildly hypothermic, and grateful. Trevor Bryce showed me his GPS unit. It was now showing their correct position. He couldn't explain the earlier reading. Dana Sue was quiet, polite, and kept looking over her shoulder to the north. When I asked her what she was looking at, she said, "The lights went out." I asked what lights. She said that for the previous 2 hours, they'd been navigating toward a set of lights they assumed was a cabin or campsite higher up the ridge. The lights had been steady, white, and visible through the trees. When Paul and I arrived, they stopped. Paul did not ask a follow-up question. He took Trevor's arm and said, "Let's get you folks down." His voice was completely neutral, but he set a pace that was faster than I would have chosen for 2 cold, tired civilians. He did not turn on his radio during the entire descent. When we reached the vehicles, he told me to drive the hikers to the nursing station in my cruiser. He said he'd wait at the gate. I asked him why he was waiting at the gate. To make sure nobody else comes up. I asked who would come up at this hour. He said, "Just go, rookie." I drove the hikers to the nursing station. They were treated for mild exposure and released the next morning. I filed a standard report. Paul filed a supplementary report I wasn't copied on. I found this out 6 months later by accident, when a filing error put his supplementary report jacket in my mailbox. I opened it before I realized it wasn't mine. The supplementary report was addressed not to our chief, but to a regional liaison officer at Indigenous Services Canada whose name I had never seen. It was 4 pages long. It described our call-out in clinical language and then listed in an appendix 14 previous incidents on the mountain between 1989 and that year in which recovered individuals had described navigating toward lights that were not visible to responding officers. 14 incidents across 15 years, all with the same detail: lights seen by the lost, invisible to the rescuers. The appendix included the full names, dates, and GPS coordinates for each case. I put the report back in Paul's mailbox. He never mentioned it. I did not ask, but I started paying attention. Over the next 3 years, I was directly involved in 11 calls originating from or related to the mountain. I kept my own records, separate from my official reports. I bought a hardcover lab notebook from the university bookstore in Kenora and logged every detail I could: dates, times, weather, call transcripts, GPS readings, officer assignments, witness statements, physical evidence. I was not investigating. I was not building a case. I was doing what any good officer does when the pattern recognition that keeps you alive in the field starts firing on something you don't understand. I was documenting. What I documented was this. Of the 11 calls, 7 involved lost or disoriented hikers or hunters. In every case, the individuals were found at elevations and positions inconsistent with their described routes. In 4 of those cases, the individuals' GPS tracks, downloaded afterward, showed paths that crossed terrain features of cliff faces, dense blowdown, a muskeg bog that no person on foot could have traversed. The tracks were clean, continuous, and recorded at walking speed. They simply went through impassable ground. 3 of the 11 calls involved individuals who were never found. These were fully investigated as missing persons cases. In each case, we located vehicles, personal effects, trailhead signatures, and in one case, a tent pitched and occupied the previous night with food still in the bear hang. The individuals were not located. No remains were recovered. The cases remain officially open. The 11th call is the one that changed my understanding of what I was dealing with. In August, 4 years after the Bryce and Sue recovery, we received a radio transmission at 2:14 a.m. on our primary dispatch frequency. The caller identified himself as Constable William Desjardins, badge number 4402. He was requesting backup for a vehicle accident on the Fire Road, approximately 3 kilometers past the gate. He described a single vehicle, a white pickup, off the road and into the ditch. Driver unconscious. No passengers. The problem was that William Desjardins had retired from our force in 2001. His badge number had been reissued to an officer named Chris Flett, who was off duty and asleep at home. We confirmed this within minutes. The deeper problem was that I had known William Desjardins. He'd been one of the senior officers when I joined. He'd retired to Winnipeg. He had died of a heart attack in 2006. He had been dead for 3 years when his voice came through our radio. Brenda Whitehawk was on dispatch that night. She recognized his voice immediately. She'd worked with him for 12 years. She told me later that it was not an imitation. It was William. His speech pattern, his habit of saying, before reading numbers. The specific way he pronounced the Anishinaabe name for the Fire Road. She was certain. We sent a 2-officer team to the Fire Road. They drove past the gate using the bolt cutters we keep in the cruiser. At the described location, they found fresh tire tracks leading off the road into the ditch. They found broken glass consistent with a headlight assembly. They found a side mirror, make and model consistent with a late 1990s Chevrolet pickup. They did not find a vehicle. They did not find a driver. The tire tracks ended in the ditch. They did not continue. The vehicle had, as best we could reconstruct, driven off the road, come to rest in the ditch, and then ceased to exist. When I listened to the recording of the transmission the following morning, there was a detail I hadn't caught live. In the background of William Desjardins' transmission, behind his voice, there was a second radio playing. It was our own dispatch frequency. And on that background radio, I could hear Brenda Whitehawk acknowledging a call. The call she was acknowledging was the one I would make 16 hours later, requesting a forensic team for the ditch site. I listened to it 4 times to be sure. Then I asked Danny Kustachin to listen. He listened once, removed his headphones, and said, "Don't put this in your report." "Why not?" "Because it's always been like this, and the people who write it down are the ones it starts talking to." I want to be clear about something. I am not a superstitious person. I do not believe in ghosts. I did not grow up hearing traditional stories about the mountain. My family is from the south end of the reservation, and the mountain was not central to our experience. My training was in criminal investigation and evidence management. My instinct, in the face of something I don't understand, is to look for the explanation I'm missing. So I looked. In the winter following the Desjardins transmission, I used professional development leave to spend 2 weeks in the regional archives. I reviewed every incident report our force had filed involving the mountain going back to 1978, when our police service was formally established. That gave me a 27-year window. I cross-referenced these with OPP files for the same geographic area, which I accessed through a contact at the Kenora detachment who owed me a favor and did not ask why I wanted them. The combined record contained 143 documented incidents on or near the mountain across 27 years. I categorized them. The largest group, about 60%, were standard wilderness calls: lost hikers, injured hunters, weather strandings, vehicle breakdowns, normal outcomes, no anomalies. The remaining 40%, 57 incidents, contained at least one detail that I could not reconcile with normal operations. I am being conservative with that number. I excluded anything that could be attributed to witness error, equipment malfunction, or poor record keeping. The 57 I kept were cases in which the physical evidence or recorded data contradicted itself in ways that could not be explained by human mistake. I organized the 57 cases by type. The categories that emerged were these: temporal displacement, cases in which timestamps on recordings, GPS logs, or photographs were inconsistent with the documented sequence of events. 18 cases. Navigational impossibility, cases in which recovered individuals or search teams reported routes, landmarks, or positions that do not correspond to the physical geography of the mountain. 15 cases. Evidentiary anomaly, cases in which physical evidence, tire tracks, footprints, equipment, personal effects was found in locations or conditions that contradicted all witness accounts. 12 cases. Identity displacement, cases in which radio transmissions, phone calls, or recorded voices were attributed to individuals who were demonstrably not present, or in 3 cases, not alive. 7 cases. Unresolved disappearance, cases in which individuals vanished on the mountain with no remains, no trail, and no resolution. 5 cases. 7 instances of dead people on the radio. I want you to sit with that number. I brought my findings to Danny Kustachin, who by then had been my sergeant for 3 years. Danny was a careful man. He'd grown up on the reservation, served in the Canadian Forces before joining the police, and had the kind of authority that came from never raising his voice. He listened to my presentation without interruption. When I finished, he opened his desk drawer and removed a manila folder. "I did the same thing you just did," he said. "I did it in 1998. His folder contained a nearly identical analysis covering the years 1978 through 1997. His numbers were slightly different. He'd been less conservative in his exclusion criteria, but his categories were functionally the same. He'd identified 41 anomalous incidents across 19 years. The overlap between our two data sets for the years we both covered was exact. Every case I'd flagged, he'd flagged. "What did you do with it?" I asked. "Same thing you're about to do. Nothing." "That's not good enough." "No," he said. "It isn't." He told me then about the BIA correspondence, Bureau of Indian Affairs. Wrong country, we're in Canada, but that's what the letters said. He'd found them in a storage room at the old band office in 2001 during a renovation. 3 letters, dated 1952, 1953, and 1961 on United States Bureau of Indian Affairs letterhead, addressed to the chief of our First Nations predecessor band council. The letters referenced a cooperative monitoring agreement involving the site and described data-sharing protocols between an unnamed American research installation and a Canadian government department identified only by a file number. The letters were in English. The dates predated our police force, our modern band council, and the current reservation boundaries. The file number Danny found in the letters did not correspond to any known Canadian government filing system he could identify. He'd made photocopies. He showed them to me. The language was bureaucratic, dry, and specific. One passage from the 1953 letter has stayed with me verbatim. Continued observation confirms that the temporal displacement field is stable, localized, and responsive to sustained human presence. Recommend maintenance of the exclusion perimeter and quarterly signal monitoring at the established frequencies. Temporal displacement field, 1953. "Who else knows about this?" I asked. Danny named 3 officers, 2 retired, 1 deceased. He named the previous chief of our police service. He named a conservation officer from MNR who had since transferred to British Columbia. He named an epidemiologist from Health Canada who had visited the reservation once in 2003 for reasons that were never clearly explained, and had spent 4 days interviewing elders about the mountain before leaving without filing a report. What happened to the original letters? They were in the storage room. When the renovation was finished, the storage room was cleaned out. The originals weren't in the boxes that were moved. I have the photocopies, that's all. The following summer, I did something I'd been building toward without admitting it. I formally requested access to the fire tower at the summit. My stated reason was a routine inspection related to a wildfire prevention review. It was a legitimate request. The tower still existed as a physical structure, and our force had standing authority to inspect infrastructure on reservation land. The request went through our chief, through the band council, and then into a silence that lasted 6 weeks. The response came not from the band council, but from a regional office of Indigenous Services Canada. It was a single page. It acknowledged my request. It stated that the fire tower was under federal maintenance covenant, and that access required coordination with a monitoring partner. It provided a phone number with a 505 area code, New Mexico. I called the number. A woman answered. She did not give her name or identify her organization. She asked for my badge number. I gave it. She asked for my date of birth. I gave it. She asked me to spell the Anishinaabe name of the mountain. I told her I wouldn't do that over the phone. There was a pause. "Good," she said. "That's the right answer." She told me that access to the summit area was restricted under an agreement that predated Canadian Confederation. She said this without irony. She said that the monitoring program had been continuous since 1911, and that the fire tower, constructed in 1948, had been built as infrastructure for the program, not for fire detection. Its decommissioning in 1987 was administrative cover for the removal of the program from provincial oversight. I asked her what the program monitored. The boundary. The boundary of what? "Officer, you've read the 1953 correspondence. You already know." I had not told anyone outside our force about the BIA letters. Danny had not told anyone. The photocopies were in his desk, and I had handled them once. She told me that if I wanted to visit the summit, a field liaison would meet me at the fire road gate on a date of my choosing. She recommended autumn after the first frost because activity is lowest when the ground temperature drops. She gave me a 6-digit authorization code and told me to give it to the gate liaison. Then she said something that I have thought about nearly every day since. "The calls, you've been cataloging the ones with impossible timestamps. They're not malfunctions. They're not recordings. They're live transmissions from inside the boundary. Time doesn't move at the same rate there. It folds. The people calling for help are calling in real time. Their real time, not yours." She paused. "Some of them are calling from your past, some from your future, and some of them are you." I asked her how she knew about my catalog. "Because everyone who works your position builds one. We have 6 previous versions. Yours is the most thorough." The line went dead. When I redialed, the number was not in service. I waited until October. First frost came on the 9th. I drove to the fire road gate on the 12th at 7 a.m. A man was waiting in a dark green pickup with no plates and no agency markings. He was indigenous Dine, I guessed from his features, though I didn't ask and he didn't volunteer. He was perhaps 60. He wore civilian clothes and carried a canvas rucksack. He asked for my authorization code. I gave it. He unlocked the gate with a key, not the standard M&R padlock key. He drove, and I followed. We passed the point where the fire road officially ends, and continued on a track I had not known existed, switchbacking up the northeast face through dense spruce and birch. The track was maintained. Culverts were clear. Brush was cut back. Someone was servicing this road regularly. We parked at a clearing just below the tree line. From there, we walked. 20 minutes of steady climbing across open granite brought us to the fire tower. Up close, it was in far better condition than its decommissioned status suggested. The stairs were sound. The cab windows were intact. There was a padlock on the cab door. The man opened it. Inside, the cab was equipped. Not with fire-spotting equipment, with instruments I partially recognized and partially did not. There were 2 radio receivers, one modern, one that looked like Korean War surplus. There was a barometric array. There was a seismograph, an actual drum seismograph, paper and stylus, still running. There was a set of directional antennas mounted to the roof that I could see through the windows, oriented not outward toward the horizon, but downward toward a specific point on the north slope. The man set down his rucksack and turned on one of the radios. Static filled the cab. He adjusted the frequency slowly, passing through bands of silence and distant noise. Then a voice broke through. Clear, calm, professional. A man reporting his position on the mountain, requesting confirmation that his GPS coordinates had been received. He gave a date. The date was September 14th, 1997. "That's a search and rescue volunteer," the liaison said. He was part of a team looking for a missing hunter. He's making that transmission right now, from his perspective. He's been making it for 27 years, from ours. The boundary caught him on the north slope, and he doesn't know it. He thinks he's been walking for about 4 hours. Is he alive? Define alive. He's conscious. He's transmitting. He experiences time. But he's not in the same temporal flow as you and me. When the boundary shifts, and it does, it breathes, it expands, and contracts with temperature and season. His transmission becomes audible on standard frequencies. That's when your dispatch picks up the impossible calls. They're not impossible. They're just not from now. I asked about the missing persons, the 5 in my catalog. 3 of them are inside the boundary. We can hear them intermittently. 2 of them we believe have exited at different points in the past. We have evidence that one of them was briefly present in this area in 1961, based on a physical description in an RCMP report that matches a missing person from 2004. She would have experienced approximately 3 hours of transit. From her perspective, she walked through the spruce on the north slope, became disoriented, and emerged onto a logging road that shouldn't have been there. She was picked up by a logging crew, gave a false name, and disappeared from the record within a week. Where is she now? We don't know. 1961, somewhere. I stood in that cab and listened to a man from 1997 describe the weather around him. He said it was overcast, about 8 degrees. I looked out the window. It was clear and -2. He was perhaps 1,000 meters from where I stood, in the same physical location, 27 years away. Why hasn't this been made public? The liaison turned off the radio. He looked at me with an expression I can only describe as professional fatigue. Not secrecy, not menace, tiredness. Because there's nothing to make public, we can't control it. We can't predict it. We can't map the boundary with any precision it moves. We can't extract the people inside it without entering it ourselves. And anyone who enters it becomes subject to the same displacement. All we can do is monitor, maintain the exclusion perimeter as best we can, and train local law enforcement to manage the calls without generating public attention. That's what your predecessors have done. That's what Danny Kustachin does. That's what you're being asked to do. Manage it. Yes. People are trapped in there. Yes. And you want me to answer the phone when they call and then do nothing. I want you to understand that nothing is the only action that doesn't make it worse. Every search party that goes past the North Slope in the wrong season risks losing more people. Every person who enters the boundary creates a new signal for someone else to follow in. The calls are real. The pain is real. And the only mercy available is to keep other people from following them in. I stood there for a long time. I could hear the wind across the granite and the faint hiss of the radio in standby. "The call we received in October," I said. "The one with my voice, my badge number, my sergeant's name. Was that me from inside the boundary?" He didn't answer immediately. Then, "We don't know. It might be a future version of you who enters the boundary and then transmits from inside it. It might be a version of you from a timeline that has already happened. We have precedent for both." Precedent. Your badge number appears in transmissions from the boundary 4 times across our monitoring history. 2 of those transmissions are dated before you were born. One is dated 3 years from now. One is dated in a year we have agreed not to disclose. I left the summit at noon. The liaison locked the cab, walked me to the vehicles, and handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper listing a radio frequency and a monitoring schedule. At the bottom, in handwriting, someone had written, "Listen but do not respond. This is the only protection we can offer." I drove home. I did not tell Danny what I'd learned at the summit. I didn't need to. He already knew. I served for 9 more years after that visit. I managed the mountain calls. I listened to the monitoring frequency on the schedule I'd been given, alone in my cruiser, parked at the fire road gate at the prescribed times. I heard transmissions from inside the boundary. I heard search and rescue volunteers from the 1990s. I heard a conservation officer from the 1970s calling in a fire report. I heard a child singing in Anishinaabe, a song my grandmother used to sing to me, in a voice I did not recognize. Once, on a night in February, I heard my own voice again. Not the transmission from the original call, a different one. I was older in it. My voice was rougher. I was not calling for help. I was reading coordinates, slowly, carefully, the way you do when you want someone to write them down. Then I said a name. My daughter's name. My daughter, who was 8 years old and asleep in her bed, while I sat in my cruiser listening to a version of myself, read her name into a radio from somewhere inside a fold-in time on a mountain I could see from my kitchen window. I turned the radio off. I drove home. I went into my daughter's room and watched her sleep, and I understood for the first time the exact weight of what Danny Kustachin and Paul Mikis and William Desjardins and every officer before me had been carrying. You don't stop it. You don't fix it. You don't warn the public. You sit with it. You answer the calls that come through, and you write reports that say nothing. And you lock the gate, and you listen on the frequency, and you carry it, because the alternative is that someone else walks up that slope and doesn't come back. I retired at 51. My pension was full. My record was clean. I told my chief that I was tired, which was true in a way that no one who hasn't held this post can understand. 3 years into retirement, I was visiting the detachment to drop off paperwork related to a pension inquiry. Brenda Whitehawk was still on dispatch. I was standing in the hallway when the console chimed with an incoming transmission. I wasn't supposed to be listening. But the dispatch room door was open, and I heard it before Brenda could put on her headset. The caller identified himself as a tribal police officer requesting backup on the mountain. He gave his badge number, 4417, my badge number. His voice was mine, older than the last time, strained. He described a situation I did not recognize. Run. Multi-vehicle incident on the fire road. A medical emergency. Names I did not know. He gave a date. The date was 4 years in the future. Brenda looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. Our eyes met. She held the look for 3 seconds. Then she reached over to the console and pressed the button that deletes an unlogged recording. The transmission disappeared. No record, no file, no evidence it had ever occurred. "Go home," she said. I went home. Brenda died last March. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and cruel. I sat with her family at the funeral, and I did not speak about any of this. Her daughter told me that in her last week, Brenda had asked for a pen and paper and written down a single sentence. The daughter showed it to me because she didn't understand it and thought I might. It said, "Tell 4417 the new one is starting. The mountain is already talking to her." The new officer assigned to Wilderness Patrol and Mountain Area Response is a woman named Constable Sarah Brightnose. She is 26. She graduated from the Ontario Police College 18 months ago. She is sharp, thorough, and deeply committed to the community. I have met her twice. She reminds me of myself at that age, skeptical, methodical, and certain that every mystery has a rational explanation waiting to be uncovered. She has been assigned the mountain rotation. She does not know yet what that means. Rational explanation waiting to be uncovered. She has been assigned the mountain rotation. She does not know yet what that means. 2 weeks ago, I drove past the fire road gate. There was a cruiser parked there. Sarah's cruiser. It was 10 in the morning, broad daylight, nothing unusual. She was probably doing a routine patrol check. The gate was open. I slowed down. I almost stopped. I almost got out and walked up to her window and told her everything I've told you. The BIA letters, the woman in New Mexico, the fire tower, the boundary, the monitoring frequency, the voices, Danny's folder, Brenda's note, my own voice on the radio. Everything. I didn't stop. I kept driving. Didn't stop. I kept driving. Because Danny didn't tell me either. Paul didn't tell me. Nobody told any of us. We each built our own catalog. We each made the call to the number that was no longer in service. We each climbed the tower. And by the time we understood what we were carrying, we also understood why no one had handed it to us. The knowledge has to be earned. The weight has to be accumulated one call at a time. A sudden transfer of it breaks people. A slow accumulation of it builds the kind of officer who can sit in a cruiser at midnight and hear a dead man's voice requesting backup, and respond not with panic, but with the steady, quiet practice of doing nothing well. I do not know if I will ever enter the boundary. The transmissions suggest that I do, or that a version of me does at some point. I have heard myself from inside it. I have heard myself reading my daughter's name. I do not know what that means. I do not know if the future those transmissions come from is fixed or if it can be changed by the act of knowing about it. The woman in New Mexico did not tell me. The liaison at the tower did not tell me. Danny did not tell me because Danny did not know. What I know is this. The mountain stands where it has always stood. The boundary breathes with the seasons. The calls continue. Somewhere inside a fold in time, a search and rescue volunteer from 1997 is still walking through overcast skies at 8 degrees, looking for a hunter who was lost before the volunteer was born. Somewhere inside that same fold, a woman from 2004 is stepping out onto a logging road in 1961. giving a false name to men who will never know what they witnessed. Somewhere in there, a version of me is reading coordinates into a radio, saying my daughter's name, hoping someone on the other side is listening. Someone is always listening. That is the only comfort I can offer. And it is not enough. The mountain is already talking to Sarah Brightnose. She just doesn't know it yet. By the time she does, she'll have built her own catalog. She'll have called the number. She'll have climbed the tower. And one night, parked at the Fire Road gate with the monitoring frequency open, she will hear her own voice coming through the static from a place she hasn't been yet. And she will understand why nobody told her. It is the loneliest act of mercy I know. You sit with it. You listen. You carry what you hear. And when the next one comes along, you let them find it the way you did, slowly, with their own hands, or one impossible call at a time. The mountain is patient. It has always been patient. And it is always already talking.